What's going on, gardeners? Growing vegetables in raised garden beds can be wonderful, but also stressful, especially in the first few growing years, when there's a lot of beginner mistakes that we can make. And unfortunately, mistakes with raised bed gardening are common, and a single mistake can ruin your gardening season. But fortunately for us, there's square foot gardening that can guide us through our gardening journey so we can avoid most of the beginner raised bed garden mistakes. In today's video, we learn what those common beginner raised bed garden mistakes are and how we can avoid them with square foot gardening. And we'll start with a mistake that I'm sure most of you are doing. And if you follow this video until the end, I will drop another bonus mistake that the majority of you are doing. So before we throw all of our precious vegetables in the compost bin, let's dig into the main content. The first mistake I see most beginners gardeners do, time after time, is to start seed germination or planting their vegetables outside too early or too late. How many times I see people asking when I can plant tomatoes? I'm gardening zone 7B. See, the question here is the root of the mistake that will follow. When to start planting is not dependent of your region or gardening zone. The main marker on which we need to adjust our planting dates is the last frost date. Square foot gardening solves all the dilemmas on when to plant what with a beautiful chart where the planting dates are not presented in specific months, but rather in weeks before the last frost date. This simplifies things so much. No more wondering if I need to start my seeds in February or in March. I can just check the table and see that tomato seeds must be started indoors 6 weeks before the last frost date. So for me, 23rd of March is when I will start to germinate my tomatoes. So, when's your optimal time to start your tomatoes? Leave me a comment down below. Next on the list of mistakes I see beginner gardeners do, and I must admit, I did it too, is not knowing how big of a garden you will need. Imagine that you had started gardening, built all your raised beds, and planted some wonderful vegetables in them. And then realizing in the middle of the season that you could have planted more, or that you have planted too much. And the fact that all of this could be avoided makes that feeling even worse. Or for me it did. But when we start gardening, who knew that all you need is a simple 4x4 raised bed to grow all the salad vegetables? Mels recommends to have 1, 2, 3, 4x4 raised beds per person depending on what you want to eat from your garden. And not only that, in the Square Foot Gardening book you can also find good beginner's layout designs for your raised garden beds. I recommend you to go and check them out. I will leave the link to where you can buy the book in the description down below. Another mistake that can be made in your raised bed garden, causing you to waste precious space, is to use inadequate plant spacing. Not only that you can plant your plants too far apart, wasting precious real estate in your raised garden beds, but also by planting them too close together, they can grow smaller and yield you less than they could if spaced properly. With square foot gardening, you won't have these problems, because Mel designed a plant spacing template for every plant that can be planted in your raised bed garden, and wrote it down in his book in an easy to understand chart. His plant spacing is not a conventional spacing where you plant your plants in rows, but rather in a square grid from 16 to only 1 plant per square foot. Doing so, you will increase the growing potential of your raised bed garden, growing you more likes and vegetables. The following mistake can ruin your gardening season, so pay attention. All your plants that you will plant will be planted in a growing medium that has more or less nutrients, and depending on the quality and the type of nutrients, your plants will thrive or barely survive. And the worst part is that adding some sort of fertilizer can do nothing at all, or even worsen the condition of your soil. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, soil pH, trace minerals, and so on. All of this can and will affect your plant growth. But how can you be on top of that, your first growing years, when the problems with your plants can be enough that you don't have time to check your soil? To have the best soil mix for a raised bed, or how I call it after my test of soils for raised garden beds, the king of growing mediums, you can use the square foot gardening soil mix. This mix is easy to make and will have all the nutrients your plants need for their growth. So 1/3 peat moss, 1/3 coarse vermiculite, and 1/3 compost. With this you will have the perfect soil mixture that will prevent another common raised bed garden mistake. Coming up. If you find value in this content so far, consider subscribing to learn more about square foot gardening and other gardening related stuff. Now, another gardening mistake that this soil mix will solve is inappropriate watering. Because you can't see how much water did the soil retain, usually the tendency is to overwater, causing root rot and other problems that eventually will cause your plant to die. But if you use the square foot gardening soil mix, all of this can be avoided because the mix absorbs the water well and drains all the excess away. All of this is possible because of the combination of vermiculite and peat moss. Peat moss will retain moisture well, and vermiculite with its pores will be responsible for water drainage. A perfect combination. Fifth on the list of raised bed gardening mistakes I see people do is to build too large raised beds. So large in fact that I need to walk on them to reach the middle, or so long that I'd rather jump over than walk around. Did you know that there is a maximum recommended width and length for your raised beds? To reach the middle of your raised beds from both sides, it's recommended that your raised bed are not wider than 4 feet, because usually an arm can reach 2 feet without any problems. But if you're building the raised beds for your kids, don't go wider than 3 feet. Following this logic, if you're building your raised beds against a fence or a wall, don't go wider than 2 feet. The length of your raised beds, on the other hand, can be whatever you like, but I would say that 4 feet is to keep things nice and neat, 8 feet is for practical reasons, because less pathways in your garden, and 12 feet is the maximum I would go here. By having a classical 4x4 square foot gardening raised bed, it will allow you to dedicate it to a specific plant, like I did with my brassicas. Here you go, the bonus tip. I saw that many of you are doing the mistake of watching my videos without subscribing. You are missing a good chunk of knowledge by doing so. So, subscribe. What are you waiting for? We all do mistakes, some more than others. But luckily, we can help each other out by pointing those mistakes out and showing the solution for them. In this video, I showed you just a few common raised bed gardening mistakes that you can make or avoid if you follow the square foot gardening method. Again, I would strongly recommend you to go and grab a copy of the square foot gardening book. Link will be in the description if you'll decide to start gardening with this wonderful technique. I tried to follow it from day one, and the only regret I have that I didn't bought the book sooner. Or if you don't want to buy the book, you can just like this video, subscribe to my channel, and go and watch all my other videos on the square foot gardening topic. There's a lot to learn. Happy gardening!